Hey folks, this is Kalani. Patch 11.1 finally has an official release date. We also know when various seasonal content will become available in the patch, and there are some big last-minute buffs and nerfs for several classes and specs, and also for endgame content options. There's also yet another fix coming through for some plunderstorm bugs, so there's a lot to talk about in this week's WoW news video. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. First up this week, we finally have an official release date for patch 11.1. The new patch will go live on February 25th, so that's just under 2 weeks away. If you still have any last minute achievements or seasonal rewards that you want to get your hands on, that's going to be your deadline. For anyone just chilling and waiting until some new content comes our way, the wait is almost over. Patch 11.1 will be introducing a boatload of new content to sink our teeth into, and there are a whole bunch of changes to endgame seasonal content to make it more accessible and give you more reasons to take part in things like delves, Mythic Plus dungeons, and even the new raid. Season 2 will start up a week after the patch launches on March 4th, so we'll get the new zone and all the content that goes with it, like the Drive Mount, Renown rewards, Cartel contracts, story quests, the new delves, some of the delve updates, the character select screen changes, all that good stuff on February 25th, and then the higher item level rewards and new seasonal content will become available with the new season. So that's going to be the new raid, Mythic Plus dungeons, higher tiers of delves, world bosses, and pretty much anything else that rewards higher item level gear. It looks like pretty much everything will be opening all at once in Season 2 as well. We have seen staggered releases of the higher difficulty content in some previous seasons and patches, but in Season 2 it looks like we'll be able to hit the ground running. On March 4th, the new raid will open up on normal, heroic, mythic, and LFR difficulties. Only the first wing of LFR will be available, but that means every difficulty will become active all at once. The second raid finder wing comes out on March 11th, the third is going to be on March 18th, and then the last wing opens up on March 25th. So there's only 1 week between each of the LFR wings as well, which is great to see. With the Mythic Raid being available right away, that should mean there will be no limits on Mythic Plus dungeon progression and rewards, and no limits on Delve progression and rewards as well. So everything, even the highest item level rewards from every endgame system, should be available as soon as March 4th rolls around. So your only limit is going to be how quickly you can gear up and clear that content. Now, patch 11.1 may be right around the corner, but that's not stopping the dev team from squeezing in some last-minute changes, including some huge buffs and nerfs for various classes and specs. Blood Death Knights will see a 20% damage boost across the board, which is kinda crazy. These all-ability buffs or nerfs usually don't get into the double digits unless something really bad has happened with balance tuning, but we're actually going to see a lot of this in these notes, especially for the tanks. For Demon Hunters, both the Hunt and Sigil of Spite damage will see an 8% damage boost for both specializations. There are a handful of updates for the Aldraki Reaver Hero Talent tree, and then the Fell Scarred tree will see an 18% boost to Demon Surge damage, and then Flamebound's bonus to Immolation Aura critical strike damage bonus was increased up to 50% from 30%. For Havoc specifically, they're going to see a 5% damage boost across the board for all of their abilities, so that's a nice starting point, but then Blade Dance will see a further 33% increase, Immolation Aura will see a 12% damage boost, and then their 4-set bonus was doubled up to 2% crit per stack, up from 1% per stack. And then Vengeance will see the same 20% damage buff for all of their abilities, and Demon Surge damage will be reduced by 10% instead of 20%. So some pretty sizable buffs for Demon Hunters just before the patch goes live. Druids aren't going to be left out of the big tank buffs. Guardian will also see a 20% damage boost to all of their abilities as well. Evokers have some quick updates this week too, but it's not good news for the augmentation Evokers, I'm afraid. Rumbling Earth damage was reduced to 30% of Upheaval's damage, down from 50%, and both the 2-set and 4-set bonuses for 11.1 have been nerfed quite significantly. It will be interesting to see how augmentation shapes up in this patch with the other significant changes to their overall playstyle. On the flip side, Devastation Evokers will see a 4% buff to all of their spell and ability damage. Not quite as huge as the 20% bonus that the tanks are getting, but any buffs are better than nerfs. Moving on, we come to the Hunters, which is a bit of a mixed bag. It looks like Beast Mastery will see some nerfs, including Beast Cleave and Kill Cleave effectiveness being reduced down to 80% from 90%. Call of the Wild now reduces the cooldown of Barbed Shot and Kill Command by 25%, down from 50%, and then there are quite a few bug fixes thrown in for good measure. For marksmanship, the Wind Running Quiver bonus precise shot chance was increased to 100% from 50%, Bullet Hell had its cooldown reduction effects increased, an aspect of the Hydra has some bug fixes, and its effectiveness was buffed up to 60% from 40%. And then Survival has a few buffs as well. Flanking strike damage is up 30%, Fury of the Eagle damage is up 20%, and Fury of the Eagle will splash beyond 8 targets up from 5. Pack Leader has a quick buff as well. Fury of the Wyvern Wildfire Bomb extension was increased up to 5 seconds from 2 seconds. So some buffs and some nerfs for the Hunters, depending on which spec you like to play. The mages are up next, and the Frostfire hero talent tree has some changes for fire mages. Excess Frost now reduces the cooldown of Meteor by 5 seconds up from 3, Isothermic Core now causes Comet Storm at 250% effectiveness up from 200%, and then Flash Freeze Burn will no longer trigger from combustions granted from Sun King's Blessing or Time Anomaly, so no more free procs. And then for Frost, Blizzard damage is being reduced by 10%, and Flash Freeze Burn can no longer trigger from the free Icy Veins procced by Time Anomaly, so a couple of nerfs for Frost to round out the mage changes. Monks made the list this week as well. Brewmaster will get the big tank buff, but unlike the 20% buffs every other tank has gotten up until this point, Brewmaster is only going to get a 15% buff, which seems a little weird. Brewmaster has been struggling quite a bit in Season 1, and I've seen so many complaints about the lack of Brewmaster updates or changes for 11.1. At least you're still included in this round of tank buffs, but the lower buff will probably keep the other tanks quite a bit ahead of Brewmaster. Mistweavers are also going to see some nerfs this week. Mastery Gust of Healing was decreased by 10%, Jade Bond was cut in half down to a 20% bonus, Rushing Wind Kick was buffed up to a 150% bonus up from 100%, but then Resplendent Mist was nerfed down to 60 and 120%, down from 75 and 150% bonuses. And then Manatee is going to refund 15% less mana as well, so it's not all good news for the monks, I'm afraid. Paladins are going to see quite a few buffs. For Holy, Beacon of Virtue had its mana cost reduced slightly, but more mana for your other spells will always be a good thing for any of the healers. Protection is going to see the same 15% damage boost as Brewmaster Monks, which I still find to be a bit weird considering just how dominant Protection Paladins have been throughout Season 1, especially towards the end. You'd think Brewmaster would get some more love, but as a Paladin player, I'm not going to complain that Protection is seeing some huge buffs alongside everyone else. Retribution has seen a few buffs this week as well. Final Reckoning damage has been increased by 75%, so that might actually see some play in Season 2, and then Herald of the Sun has some buffs as well. Second Sunrise was buffed up to a 20% chance to cast Divine Storm and Hammer of Wrath at 50% effectiveness, up from a 15% chance to cast it at 30% effectiveness, so we'll have a higher proc chance and more damage from the proc itself, and then Sun's avatar damage has been increased by 50%. I'll be interested to see if this is enough to bring Herald of the Sun back into the spotlight, even though hitting things with a big hammer is really fun. Then we come to the Shamans. Enhancement is going to see quite a few nerfs. Hot Hands duration is being reduced down to 6 seconds from 8. Ashen Catalyst will now increase Lava Lash damage by 8% per stack, down from 12%. Chain Lightning now increases the damage of Crash Lightning by 10% per target struck, down from 20%, so that bonus got slashed in half. Electrostatic Wager now increases the damage of Crash Lightning by 15% per stack, down from 18%, and then Chain Lightning damage has also been reduced by 15%. Wind Fury attack damage also saw a 10% nerf, but the new 4-set bonus was buffed up by quite a bit. Most of these nerfs seem to be targeted at enhancements AoE and cleave potential, so they might not do quite as well in Season 2. That's not all though. Stormbringer will see a 15% nerf to Tempest's secondary target damage, and Lightning Rod was nerfed down to 8% from 10%. For Totemic, Pulse Capacitor will now increase the damage of Surging Totem Tremor by 18%, down from 25%, and Surging Totem Tremor damage was reduced by 10%, so even more nerfs for enhancement in the hero talent trees. And then we round out this week's class changes with the Warriors. Arms is going to see another huge round of buffs, including 20% damage increases for Mortal Strike, Overpower, Execute, and Slam damage, and then Whirlwind is going to see a 40% buff to its damage done, so some huge buffs for their basic rotation abilities. Both hero talent trees will also see some buffs. For Colossus, Demolish damage has been increased by 30%, Practice Strikes will increase Mortal Strike and Cleave damage by 20% up from 15%, and then Arterial Bleed increases Rend and Deep Wounds damage by 5% per stack, up from 3% per stack. For Slayer, Opportunist increases the damage and crit strike damage of your next overpower by 25%, up from 20%. Fury hasn't been left out here. They're going to get a 30% damage boost to Whirlwind and Onslaught, and then Mountain Thane will see a 25% damage buff for Thunderblast. Strength of the Mountain was nerfed slightly, down to a 25% damage bonus though, and then Protection is going to join the other tanks with a huge 20% boost to all of their abilities. So every tank is going to see some big damage buffs as we head into patch 11.1. That's all of the class changes for this week, but there is still time for a few more updates before the patch goes live. The PTR is currently marked as a release candidate, but balance tuning changes are often pushed as hotfixes as well, so we could see even more changes next week just before the patch goes live. With there being a week between the patch release and the start of Season 2, we could also see more changes on release week. So don't worry too much if you think your class isn't doing very well right now. There is still a bit of time before Season 2 starts for real. Now, speaking of Season 2, it's not just class changes in this week's update. There have also been even more massive nerfs to dungeons and the Mythic Plus system. To start with, every creature had its health reduced by 10% in Mythic and Mythic Plus Keystone dungeons. So just a blanket across the board, everything included 10% less health nerf. That's kinda crazy, and it will make killing anything and everything a lot faster, especially when you take the key level scaling buffs into account. In addition to that, every dungeon in the season saw more targeted nerfs this week. Health of problematic bosses or trash monsters has been reduced further, a lot of annoying mobs had their damage reduced, quite a few casters had abilities removed, so they're going to cast less spells in general, and some of the harder spells to deal with have just been straight up removed from the dungeon. In some cases, entire trash packs have been moved or deleted to make the dungeon faster or easier to progress through. Timed boss abilities have been turned into percentage-based ones, so you'll have a relatively standard experience on those kinds of bosses instead of them getting much harder as you progress through key levels. Specific dungeon abilities like the Darkness mechanic in Dark Flame Cleft have been made easier to deal with, and a lot of the timers for the older dungeons have been reduced to reflect the overall pacing change of the dungeons. Those older dungeons have also been nerfed quite significantly as well, which will hopefully bring them in line with the other Season 2 dungeons. I know quite a few folks weren't happy to see the Workshop and Theatre of Pain dungeons return especially, but if the trash packs and bosses are brought in line, those dungeons could be a lot of fun in Season 2. I guess we'll have to wait and see how this all turns out, but it looks like Season 2 dungeons could be even easier to jump into with this week's changes in place. And then the last bit of info we have to go over this week is another fix for the Plunderstorm gear reward. If you earn 5,000 plunder in the Plunderstorm game mode, you are supposed to get a box of goodies in your mailbox. The most important reward here is a piece of heroic raid loot. The problem was that a lot of folks just didn't get their in-game mail, regardless of how much plunder they have actually farmed in the event, even after this was supposed to be fixed. So the dev team are implementing another fix to try and finally squash this bug. With the weekly reset on February 18th, you'll be able to buy the box that was supposed to be in your mailbox from the plunder vendor in Dornagal. If you're not too sure where this guy is, he's right around here on your map, so anyone who hasn't received their box in their in-game mail will be able to pick it up on this vendor after that weekly reset goes through. Then you just need to open the box and buy the pirate's booty from the same vendor to get your free piece of heroic raid loot. Now this is cutting it a little close. The Plunderstorm event ends on February 25th, but at least you should be able to pick up this gear reward before the new patch goes live. But that's all the updates we have for this week, so that's it for this week's WoW news video. What are you most looking forward to in patch 11.1 and Season 2? Did the huge nerfs to dungeon and delve difficulty make you more likely to run that content in the new season? Leave all your thoughts in the comments section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching, folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.